For decades, California police departments that want to sever ties with officers for misconduct have agreed to let them resign and to keep the bad behavior confidential.
This video was intended to inform and educate the public.
Welcome once again to another video by The Junkyard News. And in today's video news story, we're going to be talking about police misconduct and how easy it is for officers to hide misconduct allegations or have them expunged off their permanent records. More specifically, how hundreds of California police officers have kept past misconduct confidential. You see, for decades, California police departments that have wanted to sever ties with officers or bad apples for misconduct have agreed to let them resign and to keep the bad behavior confidential in order to avoid lawsuits. But as a result, hundreds of police officers have landed new jobs in law enforcement with no records of their past misconduct. One of the ways in which police officers keep their misconduct hidden or even get it expunged off their permanent records are with what's called clean record agreements. And in the past 5 years of an investigation, investigators were able to find over 300 of these clean record agreements in the state of California, involving nearly 300 officers. Although some of the officers did have multiple agreements.
But as a result, officers with bad records have landed new jobs in law enforcement, and their new employers have no idea of their past. That's the finding of a 5-year-long investigation by the San Francisco Chronicle and the University of California, Berkeley's investigative reporting program.
And it's not just one department that's a majority. They found these agreements in so many different agencies across the state of California, 167 agencies, and it didn't matter the size or the region. Small departments, medium departments, large police departments, it didn't matter. You may be thinking to yourself, what kind of misconduct are we talking about? An investigator stated that there was a big question when they started the investigation. They were wondering, is this just minor mistakes that police are making and then getting these agreements to clean their records? And what investigators found was no. This is serious misconduct. Everything from dishonesty to assault to excessive force. Now, some of you out there may have never heard the term clean record agreement. A police clean record agreement refers to an informal or formal arrangement that allows a police officer's disciplinary record to remain clean and unblemished despite prior incidents of misconduct. This type of agreement can take several forms, often tied to settlements, union contracts, or disciplinary proceedings within a department. The term itself is not always used explicitly, but it describes mechanisms designed to protect and even expunge an officer's record under certain conditions. You may be thinking, well, what are those conditions? How do they come into play? Well, police union and collective bargaining agreements. In many police departments, union contracts include provisions that protect officers from certain forms of discipline being made public or from permanent records of discipline being kept after a certain period of time. For instance, an officer might have a misconduct incident removed from their record after a specific period of good behavior, like 1 to 3 years. These agreements often set rules for how long disciplinary actions are kept on a permanent record before they are expunged, meaning an officer can return to a clean record status after a certain period of time, thus hiding the past misconduct. In some cases, the agreement may specify that if misconduct does not result in formal discipline, like a suspension, it may not even be documented on the officer's permanent record. We also have settlement agreements. Sometimes when an officer faces legal action, such as a lawsuit for misconduct, the case is settled out of court. We all know this. Part of that settlement usually includes a non-disclosure agreement, and it also may include a clause that the officer's record will not reflect the incident, or that disciplinary action related to the case will be expunged after a certain period of time, allowing the officer, after some time, to regain a clean record and hide the officer's past conduct. Now, what you may not know is, like in internal affairs, in some disciplinary proceedings, an officer might enter into an agreement where, like in court, they will accept a lesser charge or administrative penalty during the investigation in exchange for keeping more serious allegations off their permanent record. It's similar to a plea bargain in a criminal justice case, and this usually allows an officer to avoid harsher penalties and maintain a clean official record, or have the incident removed after fulfilling certain conditions, kind of like probation. Most departments also have expungement policies, meaning they have specific policies that allow for expungement of minor offenses of misconduct after a defined period of time, often contingent upon good behavior or no repeat offenses. And once expunged, these incidents no longer appear on an officer's official record, effectively creating a clean record once again. Now, most jurisdictions, police misconduct records are still kept confidential from the public due to state laws or police policies. This effectively means that even if an officer has a history of misconduct, it may not be available to the public or even to other law enforcement agencies in the event of a job transfer, maintaining the appearance of a clean record. And we've seen that time and time again, where an officer will be investigated for possible misconduct, but during the investigation, he may be tipped off, look, this is what's going to happen. So they resign before the investigation's complete and bounce to another department and claim to the new department that they have a clean record. And even if the new department contacts the old department to check out his work history, well, the investigation ended or is still going. So at that moment in time, oh, he's got a clean record. Okay, you're hired. When in fact, he is under investigation in that prior department. Now, in regards to internal affairs in police departments, they also have specific agreements they can enter into. An internal investigation may conclude with an agreement between the officer and the department in which the officer avoids formal discipline, such as a suspension or even termination, in exchange for leaving the department voluntarily or retiring. This can help the police officer avoid a mark on their permanent record. These clean record mechanisms can be controversial because they may allow officers with histories of misconduct to continue working in the law enforcement field without transparency, potentially endangering public trust as well as public accountability. Critics like myself argue that such agreements undermine efforts to hold officers accountable for misconduct. Now I'm going to show you a little news article clip where journalist John Yang speaks with an investigative reporter, Katie Roosh, about this topic. Katie Roosh is from UC Berkeley Investigative Reporting Program. Some of you may not have heard about this program, so let me give you a little quick background on it. The Investigative Reporting Program, or IRP, at the University of California, Berkeley, is a prestigious center dedicated to training journalists in the techniques of investigative reporting. It operates out of the Graduate School of Journalism and is renowned for producing high-quality investigative journalism that addresses significant issues affecting society. The IRP aims to develop investigative stories that expose systemic issues such as corruption, human rights violations, environmental degradation, as well as criminal justice abuses. Its mission is to both train the next generation of investigative journalists and produce impactful stories that hold powerful institutions accountable. Sounds like my type of program. Now, many alumni of the program have gone on to work for top news organizations, producing investigative reports that have won Pulitzer Prizes, Emmy Awards, and other prestigious honors. In summary, UC Berkeley's investigative reporting program is a highly respected institution within the field of journalism, offering both a cutting-edge educational experience for students and contributing to public interest journalism through impactful investigative work. So enjoy the clip, pay attention, you just may learn something, or you may already know it, but I just wanted to bring this to light and share it with everybody. Thanks again for watching this video by The Junkyard News. Be careful, people, or the next story we cover on here, it could be you in the next one.
Katie Roosh of the Investigative Reporting Program was the lead author of the articles that appeared in the Chronicle. Katie, you say that these are called clean record agreements. How many of them were you able to find in your investigation?
We were able to find over 300 involving nearly 300 officers. So some of the officers had multiple. But I think really what the major finding is that we found them in so many different agencies across the state, 167 agencies across the state of California. And it didn't matter the size or the region, we were finding these agreements.
And what sort of misconduct are we talking about? Did you find in these records?
That was a big question when we started the investigation. Was we were wondering, is this just minor mistakes that police are making and then getting these agreements to clean their records? And what we found was no, this is serious misconduct, everything from dishonesty to sexual assault to excessive force.
And there's also a wrinkle. There were some cases you found in which they sort of short-circuited the investigations into their behavior by claiming a disability. And talk about what would happen to those officers.
Yeah, those were really interesting cases. So in some situations, an officer would be accused of misconduct, and during the misconduct disciplinary proceedings, they would claim that they were injured. They had a back injury, they had PTSD, and then they would end up with these agreements that not only whitewashed their misconduct records, but then also guaranteed them a disability pension. So a pension that's meant for an officer who can no longer work, who is so incapacitated that they can no longer do their job. Now these officers are also getting that benefit as well, which is a huge benefit, a yearly salary for the rest of their lives with huge tax benefits.
And paid for by the taxpayers.
Absolutely, paid for by the taxpayers.
Is this just a California thing, or is this happening in other states as well?
Well, our investigation focused on California. California employs the most peace officers in any state in the country. But what we found when we were looking at this, and we couldn't ignore, was that there are agreements like this in almost every state, from Texas to New York to Illinois to Idaho. We found these types of agreements.
You talked to the police chiefs of not only the departments that these people left, but also the departments that they went to. What did they tell you? What was their reaction to this?
It was some of shock and disbelief. I had multiple conversations with some police chiefs and sheriffs who couldn't believe that they didn't know about the misconduct at a previous department. And on the other side, I talked to many police chiefs and sheriffs who just sit awake at night worrying about these agreements that they made that allowed officers who they don't think should be working in the profession to continue to carry a badge and a gun.
And you also wrote that some of these police chiefs who worry about this, it wasn't their call. The decision was taken out of their hands.
Absolutely. And I think that was a really interesting part of this was the involvement of the insurance companies. So when it gets to a certain step in the disciplinary process, sometimes the city's municipal insurance gets involved, and then they have ultimate settlement authority. So even though the police chief, the sheriff, the city wants to fire that officer and make sure that their record is not whitewashed, the insurance company comes in and says, nope, you don't get a say.
And you wrote that in California, there's an organization that actually advocates the use of these agreements. Who's behind that organization?
So in California, most peace officers belong to a union, and as part of that union, they pay dues to a legal defense fund. And so they have this group of lawyers who they have access to. And the one that we found that was primarily working in the state of California was an organization called the Peace Officers Research Association of California, PORAC, and their legal defense fund. They have a group of attorneys, and that legal defense fund was involved in almost every agreement that we were seeing in California.
There's a relatively new law in California that requires the disclosure of police misconduct and gives a commission the power to ban officers from being police officers. How does that law mesh with what's going on?
I think that's really interesting. That law took effect last year, and so we're still seeing how attorneys and police officers are navigating that with these agreements. But what we found from our investigation is that law wasn't aware of these agreements, doesn't specifically address these agreements, and also only addresses a specific type of misconduct. So there are only certain types of misconduct that are reportable to the state, that are required to be reported to the state. And so there still leaves this loophole for officers to kind of get around this law.
Is anything being done to close that loophole in California?
Right now, the legislature in California is not in session. They reconvene in December, but there are a lot of conversations that I'm having, obviously, because of our investigation with lawmakers about what could possibly be done. Would they model a state like Kansas or Colorado who have passed laws to specifically address these agreements? I think time will tell what California is going to do to address this, but I can tell you that they are having those conversations right now.
Videos uploaded by the Junkyard News are helped in part by viewers just like you. You can show your support for this channel by clicking the thumbs up, sharing our videos, or hitting that all-important support button on our channel page. Don't want to miss a video or a story? Make sure to check us out and like us on Facebook at The Junkyard News.